Flack Talk with James Canning, the podcast with the inside scoop on journalists from San Diego and across the nation. If you're a communications pro, have a nose for news, or you're just nosy, this is the podcast for you. Now here's your host, James Canning.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flack Talk. I'm excited for today's show because it's a little divergent from where we normally go, where we talk to traditional journalists about their careers and so forth. I had the great fortune of meeting Phil Mauriello Jr. He's the founder and host of California Underground Podcast. And he and I were serving on a political panel for NBC7 here in San Diego. And we were talking in the green room. And I don't know, I was really impressed. Thought he had a very level head about how he thinks about things. We didn't always agree on all of the issues, but at the same time, that makes us better. You know, iron sharpens iron. And so I thought it'd be great to have Phil come on and hear about his podcast. He's got a big following. He's got a bunch of episodes. He's been doing it for a long time. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to bring him in and hear his story. So Phil, hey, thanks for joining us.
Well, good to be on, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, Phil, what we're going to do is we're going to get into our rapid response questions. These are questions that we're going to ask to get the audience a little bit warmed up with your personality, and then we'll jump into the main part of the interview. Is that all right if we go ahead with that?
Yeah, fire away.
That's great. So, Phil, what's your favorite word?
Ooh, let's see. Favorite word. That's a tough question because it's like, what word do you always say all the time?
Right.
Actually, you know, it's not a word I use a lot, but it's a fun word. It's a legal word. It's like arguendo. It's a Latin phrase, so I always get a chuckle when I say assuming arguendo. It's just one of those like hoity-toity lawyer words, and you know, it's one of those things that lawyers like to throw out there to sound smart, but it makes me laugh because it's just so pretentious.
What exactly does it mean?
It's something that is used to say, like, assuming arguendo. Like, if you're to, like, propose a hypothetical to someone, say, like, well, assuming arguendo, if that's true, then it's kind of an if-then logic statement, but
okay.
Yeah, that's basically that's the fancy Latin word way of saying it.
No, that's cool, man. That's like my teacher would say, like a $10 word. It's like a $10 word.
It's a good $10. It's a good cocktail dinner word. You know, bring that out when you're at a fancy cocktail dinner. Say arguendo. I'm writing that one down right now. Yeah, say assuming arguendo.
Assuming arguendo. All right. That's good. We're going to get into Phil's got an interesting background. We're going to get into it in some of its legal, as you can tell. So, Phil, what is your do you have a secret talent that folks on your podcast or this one wouldn't know about?
I play, I think, 4 instruments.
Wow.
So I was big into music when I was younger. And I was actually, when I went to college, that was my goal, is I wanted to learn how to write music professionally so that I could go to LA and write crappy pop songs and sell out for millions of dollars.
What changed there, Phil? What changed?
2004 election. George Bush versus John Kerry. I was obsessed with the whole election process, and I was like, I just couldn't get enough of the news and going back and forth and the polls and who's winning, who's up, who's down, who's up in this state. And then I switched from a music major to a poli-sci major.
Wow, that's pretty cool. What's the 4 instruments for our listeners?
Guitar, mandolin, piano, and bass guitar.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, they're all. Is it true that once you know a guitar, you kind of know a piano, or is it vice versa, something like that? I've heard that before.
Helps. Yeah, guitar is helpful for the bass and the mandolin. Piano, not so much.
Okay.
I kind of started plunking away at that and taught myself. So, I love piano's fun. That's a great instrument. So
yeah.
I wish I did a lot better with it, but it's fun while it lasted.
I'm always impressed with people who can do that kind of stuff, man. I'm always chasing the beat. I can never catch it, though. What's your guilty pleasure? Do you got one?
Let's see. The first thing that comes to mind, I love shows about restaurant makeovers. There's a channel on Sling, and it's literally all Gordon Ramsay shows, like Kitchen Nightmares.
Yeah.
Bar Rescue is another one of my
John
favorites.
Tapper.
Bar Rescue.
John Tapper
just running in, screaming at people. I don't know why. And my wife just sits there and she goes, "It's the same show every time. Why do you watch this?" Meanwhile, she watches like The Real Housewives of Jersey or whatever. I'm like, that's the same show all the time. Anyway, but I don't know why. It's a guilty pleasure for me. It's fun to watch. And I like when I'm just wanting to hang out on the couch, I just put those shows on. That's a guilty pleasure.
No, that's cool, man. Have you ever seen the one where like the raccoons were in the ceiling tiles and they were like peeking their heads out when John Tapper was in?
Yes. Oh my God, he was going nuts. He's screaming. You couldn't even understand. He gets to a point where he gets so mad.
I'm afraid.
You don't even understand what he's saying. It's just high pitched screaming.
Yeah.
I remember that one. There was the raccoon. There was the one where the horse was in the barn. Horse was in the bar, crapped on the floor. So
yeah.
Always good shows.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on those. I like them. All right. So I know attorneys and lawyers, legal counsels, they're saints. So maybe this doesn't apply to you, but in all your work and all the things you do, what's your favorite swear word? Do you have one?
Well, I grew up in Jersey, so I mean, swearing is part of our vernacular, like especially Italian from Jersey. So I mean the F-bomb's got to be the best. I mean, it's just, you can use it so many different ways. It's really multi-purpose. It's the Swiss Army of swear words.
We're an explicit podcast here, so if you'd like to drop it for our people, you're more than welcome.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can use it as a verb, you can use it as a noun, you can use it as an adjective. It's just so versatile. You have to go with the king of swear words, which is the F-bomb.
The F-bomb. Well, Phil won't say it, so I'm going to say it. Phil's talking about the fuck word, F-U-C-K. That's what he's talking about, folks. I'm assuming you knew, but just in case. I will say that is the most popular one. That one and shit. I don't know what it is, but those two words, people feel like they can use them a lot.
Yeah.
Do you, you have a wife, you love her, but did you have a celebrity crush when you were a kid or a teenage age?
I think if we're talking like, I'm trying to figure out what childhood, like what's the age range?
Oh, anywhere from like, let's say you're like in 8th grade through high school.
Celebrity, it's got to be Topanga from Boy Meets World.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I mean, it's a popular one, but again, it's like the F-bomb. It's just like, it's popular for a reason. It's Topanga from Boy Meets World.
Yeah.
Most guys you talk to, you're like, Topanga from Boy Meets World, and everyone goes, "Yeah, Topanga from Boy Meets World," and they immediately understand. Yeah,
no, I fully understand. There's something very mysterious about Topanga, and something very alluring at the same time. Mm-hmm. Well, folks, you got a little bit of a introspective look at Phil's personality from those silly but fun questions. But now we're going to get to the meat of the interview. Like I said, Phil has the California Underground podcast, and I want to talk to him about that and kind of how he got there, given his background. We've heard a little bit about him being a lawyer, but Phil, would you kind of like open up to our folks a little bit and share a little bit about your background overall? You're from Jersey, you're a lawyer, kind of how'd you get to where you are today?
To give you the short story, like I already said, I was involved in music, fell in love with, or I don't know if fall in love was the right term. I just found my passion in politics. during 2004, John Kerry versus George Bush. I'm not ashamed to say I was anti-George Bush. I'm one stance politically that I've always had my entire life is I am extremely anti-war. So that is non-negotiable usually for me. I can get in an argument about it, but that's one thing that has been consistent throughout my political life. But so I got involved in that. Then when you're a poli-sci major, they say, hey, you know what goes well with a poli-sci major is a pre-law minor. Fast forward, did some stuff after college, worked in restaurants, then decided to go back to law school in 2014.
Okay. Now, are you in California at that time, or are you still back east?
I went to college at good old UOP up in Stockton.
Okay.
Beautiful Stockton, mere feet from the ocean, as they told us in the pamphlet. And went there for 4 years, met a lot of good friends. And then when I was looking at law schools, a lot of friends who lived down here in San Diego said, hey, you know, they got good law schools down here in San Diego. Why don't you check it out? Came out, fell in love with San Diego, got a good scholarship at Thomas Jefferson is the school I went to. Still involved in politics, loved politics. And then, eventually I started working. So I passed the bar in 2018, started working. And that's when I started the podcast. I had done, this is going way back.
Okay.
Going all the way back to 2004. I had a show, and I think you'll get a kick out of this because, you know, you and I guess you could say we're on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but in reality, I always think people agree about stuff more than they think they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had this show, it was called The Phil and Ben Show, and it was, at that time, a Democrat and a Republican.
Okay.
Our version of Crossfire.
Yep.
And we sat down, we had a college radio show, and we would talk about the issues, but we wouldn't scream and yell at each other like Tucker Carlson did with, who was the other guy?
Was it Chris Matthews? Was that the guy?
Was it Chris Matthews or whoever?
I can't remember his name, but yeah.
But we would sit down, we'd actually have conversations. We wouldn't scream and yell at each other. We'd make jokes. Maybe sometimes we'd agree on stuff. Maybe not. But it wouldn't get heated. It would just be a show about like us chatting, especially with the election coming up. It was very like pertinent at that time.
Yeah.
So we ran that for a while. Then I tried another podcast. And so like I had been kind of dabbling with it for a while. Then I finally was like, I'm going to start a podcast because I need an outlet for all this like political stuff going on in my brain. And I need to, if it's just me in my office by myself talking to myself, that's fine. And that's when it started in 2018. I just bought a $30 microphone off Amazon, opened up my laptop to Odyssey and was like, record, let's see what happens. And here we are.
That's cool. Now did it start off being California Underground podcast? Like it's always been that, right? From the beginning? Because you talked a little bit off air, like there's been an evolution of it because we're 5 years later. So like you kind of
it's always been California Underground. And the reason for the title is because I found in California is if you meet someone at your office or at school and all of a sudden you sort of kind of meander down the path of politics and all of a sudden you start talking about stuff and you're like, wait a second, are you on my side? And by that I mean like usually people who are center right or like not, I wouldn't say like a full-blown registered Democrat, which is the popular party here. Mm-hmm. You sort of got this feeling of like, oh, I met like this, we're in this like secret club together. Of like, and I know, like we agree, like, like fuck taxes, right? Like, am I kidding here? Like, so that's where it kind of came from. It was like, it's kind of a play on this, like, well, it's this underground society of people who don't really are looking for something different than the mainstream narrative here in California.
Okay. That's interesting. That's a very interesting thing. Because, I mean, people are very multidimensional, right? I mean, I think that, as you look at parties, the parties both say, these are our values, this is what we do. But people are more complex than that. That's what I think I hear you saying. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that's something that is so lost today, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm glad you invited me on your podcast and we got a chance to speak. And, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And for the people who are listening, we met that at the NBC election night. And we were on the same panel for, was it Prop 1? Was the homeless one issue?
Yes, Prop 1, yep.
So we were kind of brought in as like, okay, here are the guys who don't really agree with each other on opposite sides. And I had said something and you fired back and I was like, all right, here we go.
I was just trying to be cool on TV, man. That's all.
It came off great. I was like, all right, we're rolling this way. But I appreciated that because at the end of the day, like, you and I could still go and get a beer and talk about stuff.
Yes.
And I feel like you and I would probably still sit down and walk away with, at minimum, 75% in agreement on a lot of things.
Yeah, I think most people do, but unfortunately they don't go to find out sometimes.
And I think that's such a shame that, like, people, they, like, automatically prejudice or dislike people now based on politics.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have friends who are more liberal. I have family members who are more liberal. It doesn't mean I don't talk to them or I like argue with them all the time. Like, there's more to life than politics, and you can sit down and just enjoy people's company outside of what box they check in an election booth.
Agreed. I mean, I have family members that are more conservative. I mean, like, that's just the reality of it, right? And I think, like, you still love them, you still care about them, you still want to see them have a good life. But sometimes the vitriol that happens, gets people, sideways with each other, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well, so I do want to dig in because I think, into, the podcast and talk a little bit about it. Cause like, I thought it was interesting. I think we've kind of covered this a little bit, but like, in your intro, you talk about like you're inviting conservatives, libertarians, moderate Democrats, or people who just believe in common sense to listen. I mean, do you think you got some liberals listening too?
Maybe, I if they are, they haven't reached out to me about whether they're listening or not. But and I think that's the intro was kind of drafted that way again because that kind of constituency of people very often kind of feel like the outcasts in California. Like we don't have a voice. I mean, let's face it, the California Republicans are mostly non-existent. Like, they have no power at all in this state. So you kind of feel like you're on the outside, you're this outcast, you don't know where to go. So it does invite all those people who are like, wait a second, I think a little differently than what's the popular narrative here in California. So, I've actually thought about recently, like, changing that intro to not just be about, like, whose political party it is, but, I mean, if liberals listen, great, and, they're more than welcome to listen. And I've had people who I know through friends or associates who are like, oh, I checked out your podcast, and I knew they were liberal, but they agreed with the podcast. They were like, you know what, you brought up some really good points, and I really enjoyed it. So
yeah, no, hey, look, I actually thought the intro was really good. Like, I thought it covered a broad spectrum, right? And I got what you were getting at. So at least from this guy's perspective, I get it. Like, it makes sense, right? But hey, you've been doing it 5 years. Maybe you got something different you want to say now. Yeah,
maybe it's evolved past that original idea, and it's just something else now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that when I was listening to episodes that I thought was most impressive, right, was that, and you kind of alluded to it here, like, you haven't been afraid, to talk about the California Republican Party or the San Diego County Republican Party. You give your honest take, and it seems like it's coming from a place of, like, you just want things to be better, and you want the party to act better. Like, has anyone ever really given you any shit about that? Because I always wonder, sometimes, like, people, they hunker down, they get in their silos, and they say, oh no, we got to go this way, we got to say it this way, we got to do this. I mean, I think it's pretty refreshing, frankly, that you're more than willing to kind of hey, this is I think this is wrong, and I could agree with this, and with your own brethren.
Yeah, it's actually one of our favorite things. My co-host and I, we love to bring up is, there's a lot of conservative influencers out there who, they do it for the followers, they do it for the sponsorships, they do it so they can go to TPUSA and maybe get on stage with Charlie Kirk. There is a growing industry around conservative influencers, and I think the problem with that is that so much of what they're pushing on followers, and some of them have huge followings, 100,000 plus following, and a lot of what they put out there is just complete bullshit that you're like, wait a second, just if you spend 5 minutes researching this, you'll know you're wrong. And I know what they're doing. I know they're just pushing red meat, and I know they're just trying to get followers and be more viral. That's their gig. But it drives Camille and I crazy when we see a lot of these conservative influencers just do that. In terms of the party, we do call out the party a lot. And there's a lot of good people in the party. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of great people who are doing great things behind the scenes. There are a lot of people who are also taking advantage of the party. One of our most recent episodes was all about Carl DeMaio. I think that's one person we can both agree on in terms of Carl DeMaio. I think we actually did agree on Carl DeMaio.
We did actually. I think you were much more eloquent though about his about his situation. I was just like, oh, we gotta kill him. I don't care as long as he ain't the guy. I was a little more thuggish with my commentary, but
you were like, as long as they both bloody each other up.
Yes.
But yeah, there's so many. I feel like there's just so much more opportunity for California Republicans, and I just feel like they're not being innovative. I don't think they're speaking to Californians, and that's something that we've talked about on the show, and I've talked about plenty of times. A California Republican has to be different than a Texas Republican, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
you're involved in politics.
Yeah,
you have to speak to who you're trying to win over. So you can't come in here acting like you're a Texas Republican, guns a-blazing, or you're a North Dakota Republican or whatever. That's not going to resonate with people here in California. Right? I would imagine anybody who's Republican here is mostly probably center-right. They're probably like, hey, can we just cool it with the taxes? Maybe we can make things a little bit more affordable. Maybe make it easier to open a business. But they're not the far right. And I think the California Republican Party is so scared of losing this tiny base of far right supporters. And I don't know if you've ever been to a GOP convention.
I have not. No.
I didn't think so. But it's quite a sight. And you look at it and go, I don't think any of these people speak to everyday Californians. And I think that they're missing that huge opportunity. And I think they're so scared of losing this tiny little portion of far right wingers that they're afraid to actually go after the other 25, maybe the other independents. What are independents now? 25% of the overall electorate here in California?
Yeah, something like that.
So I just think they missed the mark. They missed the message. Now they're getting better. There are younger Republicans in Sacramento who are kind of hitting more on the kitchen table issues. Like Katie Sanchez, Joe Patterson, Josh Hoover. I think they're doing a good job up there, kind of being like, hey, let's talk about why it's unaffordable in this state. Let's talk about gas price. That's what I think people want to hear.
Yeah.
But for California Republicans, you got to be a whole different breed. You got to think outside the box. You got to give solutions to Californians that they want. You got to speak to them. You're not trying to win over, MAGA voters in Texas or Arkansas or something like that. So that's why we go so hard after them, is that there's a lot of room to get better. And people like Carl DeMaio inevitably hold it back because he's more interested in glorifying himself and making money for his PAC, Reform California.
Right.
At the end of the day.
Right.
So yeah, we're not afraid to take pot shots or call out our own party, and even conservative influencers. Like, I'll get to your original question. I'll call out conservative influencers on Instagram.
Yeah.
And my DMs it'll be like, it's interesting. It's like 70-30. 30% are absolutely livid at the fact that, how dare you call out Charlie Kirk, or how dare you call out Benny Johnson? This is why we keep losing, is because we keep fighting amongst each other. And they're like, can't you find something better to do? And they just call me out about it. I'm like, hey, whatever. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And then the other 70% are like, oh, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Like, this is crazy. I don't want to. I can't believe it. I'm glad I wasn't the only person who thought that when I saw that post. So.
Well, yeah, no, it sounds like you've tapped. Obviously, you've done a good job of tapping into a group of individuals that, maybe the party hasn't quite appreciated yet enough. And so I think that's smart on your part. Like, it just is. Like, and to kind of recognize, who am I? What am I about? And how do I connect with all these other folks that think and, have a broader perspective maybe than, a far right person. So that's fantastic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, there's plenty of accounts out there that are, MAGA Patriot 1776 or whatever.
Window picture, usually, to be honest with you. But anyway.
Yeah, and it's just like a, Trump with an American flag behind it.
Yeah.
Or like, make California gold again, or make California red again, or something like that.
Yeah.
There's plenty of those accounts out there. So I don't think we need another one of those red meat accounts.
Yeah. No, it's great. I hear you. And I commend you. I think it's great. We all got to hold each other accountable with whatever we believe in, whether that's our coworkers or friends, our political parties, so on and so forth. And so I think that that's fantastic that you're willing to do it, because there's some people that aren't brave enough to do it. So, congrats on that. We talked a little bit about the fact that you've done 254 episodes. You do them weekly. You do them live. I mean, I think that's fantastic. That's something that I'm striving to do. I don't do them live, but hoping to get there one day to that echelon. I'm curious, who in that 254 episodes, who's been some of your favorite guests and why?
We had a whole. I'm trying to think. Recently, we had a whole bunch of great guests. I love all of our guests. I think they all add something to the narrative that people don't know about. We had a couple of them, I have to say, like James Gallgaher was great. Joe Patterson, also great. I think these are guys who are just like,
for maybe our listeners who don't maybe know, can you explain who those folks are, and then anybody else?
Sorry, James Gallgaher and Joe Patterson are both California assemblymen.
Okay.
So they're up there in Sacramento. They see how the sausage is being made. Diane Dickson was amazing. She came on and she was so full of fire and passion, and we were just like, I remember Camille and I got off that podcast and we were like, whoa, we were blown away, because we were just like, that was not what we were expecting, but she was great. Like I said, Josh Hoover is great. So there's a good contingency. We've been lucky. I think we've been really lucky in the people we've had on. We had Brian Dahle on when he was running. We had Brian Dahle on with his wife, Megan Dahle, together, which was great. The Dahles are great people, salt of the earth people. When you meet them, the Dahles are you don't get a sense of how you can meet some politicians and you're like, hey, I get it, you're a politician. So you're giving me the spiel, I get it, you're a politician.
Yeah.
But you meet the Dahles, and they're just such real people. They're in trucking up there in Northern California, so that's where they come from. Blue collars, salt of the earth people. Yeah. Same thing with James Gallagher. All those people. They're just very real people. So I enjoyed them. Those are right off the top of my head. Those are some great guys. Yeah.
No, that's cool. Are there any that you would that you're hoping to get one day, or people that they could be beyond? I mean, I know you're really focused on California. I mean, that's your niche. But is there anyone else you'd love to have that you're either angling for or hoping they take notice of what you're doing?
Yeah, in terms of there's some people up there in the assembly we're trying to get on. For some reason, I guess they're not podcast people. They don't want to come on, but they're doing great work, and we want to get them on.
Okay.
In terms of, we don't really have a lot of national people on. Again, just because it is so focused on California specifically.
Right.
We don't even really like to have like Congress people on, to be honest. Like, it's very rare we have congressional members on or people running for Congress, just because our philosophy is like, anybody who says I'm going to run for Congress and I'm going to fix California is not telling you what their job is truthfully. Like, that's not their job, is to go to Washington and fix California. That's their job, to go to vote on federal issues and national issues. I'm always of the belief, if you really want to get your hands dirty and fix parts of California, be a county supervisor, go run in Sacramento. So we don't really even have congressional people on.
Okay.
So yeah.
You mentioned Camille, and that's your co-host, and in watching some of your episodes, I kind of noticed like you lift Camille up as like kind of your kind of guru of research. And I'm always curious, for podcasts, especially ones that you provide a lot of information about ballot measures and things like that, candidates, stuff like that, along with just issues. I think recently you talked about Grants Pass and, versus Johnson, right? Which is kind of the homeless encampment ordinance that's being argued in Oregon right now. How do you, and maybe this is for other podcasters, a lot of our listeners are journalists, young journalists, people who are young PR people, maybe aspiring podcasters, but like how is a kind of maybe not a traditionally trained journalist, do you make sure that you're finding all the right information to kind of share out there?
That's a good question. We do our research pretty thoroughly. I feel like sometimes, like shows like last week, there was more work to put in before the show actually happened, because you have to read all these briefs and everything, and it takes a couple hours to do all this stuff. But I think the most important thing for our show is that we don't just pull all of our sources from one news site that agrees with us. And if that's your question, let me know if I'm going. It's a question of like, one, I don't know. I'm not a numbers guy, so I'm not great at numbers, but like, I'll rely on other things, other resources, and I try to like grab from a lot. I mean, I think that's smart, right? And I think that's, and it's nice to hear. And I think people don't think that when they think podcast. Frankly, I don't think they think it when they think Republican or Democrat. They think we just grab from, their own, whoever's talking points. But that's a really good thing, I think, for all of our listeners. I think we're kind of in this point where, people, social media, everyone's going to like whoever tells them what they want to hear. And I think that's it's to a detriment to our society, frankly. Yeah, and it sort of goes back to that, our whole mantra, which is like, we could sit here and pull all of our stuff from Fox News or, Gateway Pundit or any of these like sites that want to do one thing, which is convince you or convince you that you're right, that you've always been right. California Globe is another one. I like California Globe, but we know they lean right. So I think we work harder to not include that many of those specific sources. Like, we won't go into a show saying, let's just pull every article from California Globe and whatever Fox News says, because then we're not really getting into the actual issue. And that doesn't make for a good podcast, because you're not giving us anything to really kind of sit down and sink our teeth into. Like, I think it's better if I pull up an article from the LA Times or the San Francisco Chronicle and I read it on the show, or I read parts of it on the show, and then it gives something like Camille and I can talk about and discuss, and maybe we have facts or maybe we've done our research to kind of rebut that. Like, I think that's a way to like challenge yourself based on your sources and your own biases to make sure like, okay, if I was confronted with this argument out in the real world, do I actually have a leg to stand on, or am I just going to scream that Gavin Newsom sucks? Like,
Right.
so I think it's important to make sure you get the right sources. And funny story about how Camille and I met and why I call her the best and fastest researcher in the West on every show. We had met because back when I was working solo, it was around COVID. Business was slow. I had more time to focus on doing California Underground stuff. I had met, had I met him yet or no? I was keeping an eye on a candidate named Major Williams.
Okay.
If you remember Major Williams.
Name sounds familiar.
He was a rising grassroots star around 2020. Everybody loved him. He was this younger, hip candidate. Everyone was all about him. They're like, oh, he's in the military because his name's Major. He just changed his name to Major. And so I was kind of looking at it, I was like, there's something off about this candidate. And so I started to dig into him. And he's like, he even said on one of his Instagrams, he goes, if you have questions about what I spend my money on in the campaign, go ahead and look up everything I've ever done, and you'll be proven wrong. So I was like, okay, challenge accepted. So I went ahead and did a video going through, like a YouTube video, just going through all of his campaign expenditures.
Okay.
And I literally showed people like, hey, this is how you can do this yourself. Like, this is where you go. You can go look at what people are spending money on, where they're getting their money from.
Yeah.
And I went through and I found some weird, like, he spent hundreds of dollars on limo service, and then like stuff like at the Lido house up in Newport Beach. And like, there were a lot of things that I didn't accuse him of it. I just said, these are odd things that if you're contributing to a candidate, why is he spending money on lavish things like limos in the Lido house? So Camille at that time was a follower on Instagram, and she reached out to me and she was like, hey, I got more info as well. And she had done way more research. She's amazing at research. And that's sort of how we got to know each other. And ever since then, she's great at research, and like, she'll go find something, like, you name a person, she'll go find something about it. So,
well, that's cool. That's real cool. I mean, that's, good partnerships sometimes come out of nowhere. And obviously you piqued her interest with doing your own research, and now you got the best in the West research. Is that how you say it? How do you what's your title for? I know I said guru, but you have...
Oh gosh, now I can't think of it. The best and fastest researcher in the West.
There you go. Camille, shout out to you.
Good job. People have even told her like you should start a opposition research company, like for politics.
Very interesting. So, look, podcasts like you talked about, yours evolved. I'm curious, what are your favorite podcasts to listen to?
Right now, I think the one that I consistently pull up and listen to has got to be Part of the Problem with Dave Smith.
Okay, tell us about that.
He is a libertarian, and so his whole show is the name is a play on part of the, like, they're both part of the problem, like Democrats and Republicans, they're both part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I actually found them through a debate with someone else, and their argument was, should libertarians just join the Republicans and be like part of the Republican Party and take over, or should the libertarians just stand on their own? And I was curious because I was like, I would consider myself like a small L libertarian.
Okay.
And I was listening. I was like, okay, let's check this guy out. And then at first he was, bashing Trump, and I was like, I don't know about this. But his arguments were so good, I was just like, okay, let me check out his podcast. And so ever since then, he's a comedian by day, like that's his normal job.
Okay.
But then he does this libertarian podcast as well, and he's gotten very big. So he's been on Joe Rogan several times. But I like to listen to him because he calls out both sides, and anybody who knows me, I think both parties have big issues. So
yeah,
it's nice to hear someone who's not just going to blow smoke up your butt.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, we all pull from some places for, that inspiration and what informs us and what gets us excited. You alluded to this, and I want to ask you this last question before we get to our kind of the last two I got. So I got three technically, but you said it, like, do you think in all of your research, all your conversations, like, do you think there's a couple issues and, that generally Republicans and Democrats should be able to agree on? Like, are there like a couple standard ones, or is it more, well, it just depends on who you are?
That's a tough question because I guess, it depends on where you are on the spectrum of politics. So
yeah.
If you have two people who are like one's center left and one's center right, you'll probably find more, like, I think if they were like center left and center right, like, you could probably say, hey, why don't we invest in more nuclear power so that our electricity goes down and we have enough energy?
Mm-hmm.
There, you might find a lot of Democrats and Republicans are like, yeah, that's something that I personally believe. I don't understand why California, with all of its technological skills and ability, why we haven't figured out how to make nuclear safer and better. It's the cleanest carbon-free source of energy out there. That's actually a quote from Obama's old energy secretary. So, and especially with this move to like EVs and more electric cars, we need more reliable energy. And I that's one thing I think if you talk to people about it. I would think probably affordability as well. I think everybody kind of, grumbles about pumping their gas and seeing it's $5 a gallon.
Right.
That never helped. At the end of the day, it always, my belief is it always comes down to kitchen table politics. Gas prices are kitchen table politics. I'm trying to think of some other ones that I think I found people kind of agree on. Housing affordability.
Mm-hmm.
I think people on both sides of the aisle kind of go, housing's too crazy, it's too expensive for anybody to live here. But maybe that's like a larger issue, and maybe we're both kind of like arguing over the same central issue of California, is that like there's just, it doesn't seem like there's a pathway for the middle class in California.
Yeah.
And the question is one side has their proposals and solutions, the other has their proposals. So I think that's probably the ultimate problem in California right now.
Yeah. No, that's good perspective. I appreciate that. I appreciate, you sharing that thought. Because, I think that people are so, on their side, but as I feel like has been the theme of this conversation today has been, we're more complex. There's probably some crossover if we kind of settle down and we're able to kind of hash that through. Phil, we're coming to the end of our interview here. Again, we have Phil from California Underground Podcasts, and it's been a great interview so far as I'm concerned. I hope all of you, the listeners, would agree. And Phil, we're going to close on a couple of these questions here. I grew up a Roman Catholic kid. I still am. And I'm wondering, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates? I mean, you're a young man. You got a long time for you to get there. But, what are you hoping for, not just your podcast, but your life and your business and the work that you're doing in the world here?
Ooh.
Heavy, man. It's really heavy.
That is heavy.
I've had
shout outs to the Catholics. I actually just joined the church 3 years ago.
Okay.
So I'm a newly converted Roman Catholic. Let's see. I guess when you get to the pearly gates, I don't want to come up with something cliche, but it'd be nice if they say you made an impact, or you were good to people, like that. Like you left an impression because of the good things you did. If I don't, there's probably a better way.
No, that's nice. I've never heard anyone say it like that. I get you.
It's my godfather passed away when I was in college.
Yeah.
Sophomore year of college.
Sorry.
And it was unexpected. He was in his 40s. He was like the patriarch of the family.
Yeah.
And I'll always remember that for his wake, the line of people was out the room where he was into another room that went all the way around the room. It went out the room, out the front door, down the steps, and back down the block.
Wow. A lot of people loved him.
Myself, yeah, and that image sticks with me. I'm like, man, if you can touch that many people in your life, that many people show up to your funeral, you've been great. So yeah. I guess that's what I hope for.
No, that's great. Phil, I'm wondering, before we wrap up here, is there any last words or anything you'd like to share with our Flack Talk listeners? Last thoughts?
Yeah, I think this conversation tonight is evidence that people who do not agree on politics, not necessarily everything, I mean, I'm sure there's stuff we agree on, there's no reason you can't sit down and have a conversation. And I think the world would be a little bit better place if we all kind of sat down, maybe had a beer with each other and said, like, hey, what do you believe? What do I believe? Maybe don't even talk about politics, just stop pushing people out of your life and prejudicing people based on, again, what box they check inside of an election booth somewhere.
Phil, that's a great way to wrap up this show. I think it really puts a bow on it and, encapsulates what we've been talking about here today. Thanks for coming on Flack Talk. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. So it's always, like I said before we hopped on, it's fun being the guest sometimes.
If you liked Flack Talk and want to learn more about your favorite muckrakers and newsbreakers, please hit the subscribe button or visit flacktalk.com.